The trade license for species designation Human had been active for 22 years, 4 months, and 11 days. It was revoked in 9 seconds. The Galactic Council chamber existed in the orbital station Vreth Prime, a structure so vast that its central atrium could hold 40,000 delegates. Today, 3,412 were present. The chamber itself was a perfect circle, tiered like an amphitheater with the speaker's podium at its heart. Everything was designed to radiate permanence. The walls were veined marble imported from 12 different worlds, each vein a trade route, each color a negotiated agreement. The floor gleamed with the ceremonial seal of the council, a spiral galaxy rendered in inlaid starlight that actually glowed, powered by energy generators that had been maintained by human engineers for the past 2 decades. The air itself was carefully filtered, temperature-controlled to the tolerances of the 17 most powerful species. Even the humidity was calibrated. Sigrid sat in the lower gallery, 3rd row back, not the honor tier. Not the diplomatic seats. The observation section reserved for petitioners and those whose authority was being questioned. The chairs here were slightly smaller, a deliberate architectural choice to subtly diminish whoever occupied them. The sight lines slightly worse, a human would have noticed immediately. An alien might assume it was purely practical, not understanding that bureaucracy encoded power into geometry. She had coffee. Lukewarm by now, the ceramic cooling in her steady hands. The cup bore the insignia of the Terran Trade Bureau, the version issued in 2004, before Earth had even entered the galactic economy formally. She'd brought it deliberately, a reminder of where this had started. 22 years ago, when humanity had been a curiosity, when human engineers had seemed like temporary contractors hired to solve a specific problem. Now they were the foundation, and the council had just voted to pull it out. The coffee had gone cold sometime during the opening rituals. She drank it anyway. Grand Speaker Orin presided. He was Vrethian, a species whose biology included 4 functional arms and an exoskeleton that shifted colors with emotional temperature. He was currently a deep burgundy, the hue of judicial authority, almost black at the edges. He sat elevated on the speaker's platform, positioned so that every delegate in the chamber had to look up at him, their eyes forced to acknowledge his superior position. The platform itself rose nearly 3 meters above the chamber floor. The architecture was not accidental. The motion before the council, Orin intoned, his voice rich and layered. Vrethians spoke in harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't replicate, multiple tones operating simultaneously like a living chord. Concerns the Galactic Trade License issued to the species designated Human on the 14th of Standard Month 7, 2002, by Gregorian calendar. The question is simple: shall this license remain in force or shall it be revoked? A clerk, humanoid, origin unknown, species immaterial, read the charges with mechanical precision. Predatory trade practices. Algorithmic systems incompatible with galactic standards. Economic instability introduced by human market manipulation. The documents were long. They scrolled across the holographic displays mounted on every arm of the chamber, glowing text that cast faint light on thousands of attentive faces. The charges were detailed, specific, citing violations and infractions. None of them were true in the way Sigrid understood truth, built on facts, evidence, observable reality, but they were true in the way bureaucracy understands truth. Stamped, filed, signed by sufficient authorities, dressed up in the language of procedure and precedent. The vote took 17 minutes. Electronic tablets lit up across the chamber, each delegate making their choice in privacy, their votes tallied by the automated system. Green for revocation, blue for retention. The count climbed on the central display. 3,000 in favor of revocation, 3,100, 3,200 by the end. 3,412 in favor, 47 against. It was not even close. The mathematics of power had spoken. The galaxy had made its decision with overwhelming consensus. Orin rose slightly in his chair, all 4 arms spreading in a gesture of judicial authority. The Galactic Trade License for Human is hereby revoked, effective immediately. All trade agreements subordinate to this license are suspended pending reclassification. All human-authored technical protocols remain property of the Galactic Council for transition purposes. This session is concluded on this matter. He raised a single primary arm in a gesture that had been performed the same way for 40,000 years, the ceremonial closing. The decision was made, finalized, the archive systems would record it, the council records would note it. History would mark this moment. Sigrid felt the change before she saw it. the trade license badge on her lapel, a small holographic projection that displayed the council's seal, her name in 17 languages, her title, and the expiration date, which had just shifted to void in glowing red text, flickered once. A desperate stutter then went dark. The badge had been warm against her chest for 22 years. She'd worn it through 847 species-level trade negotiations. Through the authorization of 4,200 human engineers embedded across the galactic economy. Through supply chain optimizations that had made human logistics the backbone of 12 core economies. Through protocols that hadn't been questioned because they worked, now it was a dead piece of metal, inert, powerless. Sigrid looked at it. She didn't touch it. She didn't react visibly. She simply sat there for one full second, watching the hologram fade to nothing, watching the light drain out of it like life leaving a body. Then she stood. The movement was deliberate, not angry, not desperate, controlled. She placed her hand on the armrest of the observation chair and pushed herself up with measured pressure, and the gesture somehow made the silence bigger. The chamber had been noisy, rustling delegates, whispered conversations, the ambient hum of the life support systems maintaining 40,000 years of bureaucratic tradition. It all stopped. 3,412 beings ceased moving, ceased speaking, ceased breathing audibly. They all turned to watch the human woman stand in the lower gallery. She folded her data tablet. The action took 3 full seconds. Screen dark, edges aligned with perfect precision, stylus inserted into the magnetic slot where it would remain undisturbed. She placed it in her bag. She moved slowly, deliberately. If Oren was watching, and he was, his exoskeleton flickering orange now, she wanted him to understand that she was not fleeing. She was not panicking. She was leaving. There was a difference. When she was fully upright, she looked across the chamber. Not at Oren. At the Pelathi ambassador in the diplomatic section. The Pelathi had voted against revocation. All 47 delegates who had voted blue were watching her now, their small forms tense with something that might have been regret or solidarity or foreknowledge of what was about to happen. One of them stood. The Pelathi was small by galactic standards, barely a meter tall, with iridescent skin that caught the chamber's light and scattered it into component colors, blues and greens and purples that shifted as she moved. She was old for her species, marked by faint scars across her shoulder joints. She had been voting in council chambers since before Sigrid was born. She nodded once. Sigrid nodded back, then Sigrid walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed. The chamber was designed for grand entrances and ceremonial processions. The acoustic properties were engineered to carry sound, to amplify, to announce. Her footsteps announced her departure. Each step was a statement. The sound carried up the tiers of the chamber, reached the speaker's platform, and came back down as an echo. She could hear the Pelathi ambassador following, small feet moving quickly to catch up. When she reached the archway, she turned back. Oren was watching her leave. His exoskeleton had shifted colors, a ripple of orange moving across his carapace like fire spreading through dry material. Satisfaction, victory. The expression of a being who had just crushed an opponent and was savoring the moment. Humanity has been living on borrowed time in this galaxy, Oren said, his voice following her to the exit. It was a statement to the council, designed for the record, but it was meant for her to hear. It was the final word, the last pronouncement from the victor to the vanquished. Sigrid stopped. She turned her head slightly, enough to see him clearly. The light from the council's ceremonial floor reflected in her eyes. "You have made your decision," she said. Her voice was human-pitched, unresonant, and it sounded small in the chamber compared to Oren's layered tones, but it carried. The acoustics of the chamber amplified it. "Now live with ours." She turned and walked through the archway. Behind her, the chamber erupted in laughter. The sound followed her down the corridor, echoing, mocking. The laughter of 3,412 beings who believed they had won, who believed they had removed the problem, who believed they understood what they had just done. They were wrong about all three. Day 1. Human trade offices across 40 star systems closed simultaneously. No announcement, no escalation, no dramatic farewell messages. The offices simply went offline, terminals went dark, data connections severed. The human staff, engineers, logistics coordinators, trade specialists, mathematicians, programmers, evacuated with nothing but personal items. 17,000 people, coordinated with military precision, leaving in organized waves. By sunset on Earth, by dawn on the Vrethian homeworld, by midnight across half the galaxy, every human engineer who worked within the galactic economy had left their post. The offices they left behind were empty. The terminals were wiped of personal files, but the work terminals remained locked, inaccessible but present, a ghost of infrastructure, a reminder of absence. The Vrethian Commodities Exchange noticed first. Their algorithmic trading system operated in millisecond intervals: buy, sell, arbitrage, liquidate, all executed at speeds no biological mind could perceive. The algorithms executed thousands of trades per second, making micro-decisions based on market conditions. The algorithms had been designed by human engineers 7 years ago when Earth first entered the commodity markets. The code was elegant. It had made the Vrethian economy more efficient than any other in the galaxy. Profit margins had expanded. Volume had increased. The Vrethians had become wealthy beyond their previous imagination, their trade revenues increasing by 340% since human engineers had optimized their systems. By day 2, the system was executing trades 0.3% slower. It sounds negligible. In a linear economy, 0.3% is nothing, but in millisecond markets operating on razor-thin margins, 0.3% is the difference between profit and loss. By day 3, the Vrethian exchange was hemorrhaging credits. Microsecond advantages evaporated. Competitors using similar human-optimized algorithms began outmaneuvering them. The Vrethian Commodities Exchange, which had been the fastest in the galaxy, had become merely average. In the Throxian banking sector, error codes appeared on screens across their central transaction hub, not catastrophic errors. Not system crashes, just validation errors. The codes were unfamiliar. The Throxian engineers ran diagnostics. The source was their fund transfer protocol, an accounting system coded by human programmers 5 years ago. The system was throwing up validation errors on every transaction over 100,000 credits. Half the banking sector's volume ground to a halt while engineers tried to manually verify each transaction. What should have taken microseconds now took hours. Their global financial center became sluggish. Capital flows slowed to a crawl. Brenthic supply chains reported routing inefficiency. Their logistics network had been optimized by human algorithms. The routes had been calculated down to fuel savings of 0.2%, meaningless on short hauls, but across interstellar distances spanning light years, those percentages compounded into billions of credits saved annually. Now the system was reverting to baseline calculations. Ships were taking longer routes. Fuel costs climbed. Delivery schedules slipped. Cargo that should have arrived in 2 weeks arrived in 4. By day 7, 12 core economies were experiencing simultaneous degradation in systems they hadn't realized were dependent on human engineering. Grand Speaker Oren was briefed on the failures. The Vrethian economics minister delivered a report. The Throxian banking authority issued a statement. The Brenthic submitted a formal inquiry. Oren sat in his office reading these messages and felt something shift in his confidence. Transition pains, he said aloud, dismissing the reports. The human infrastructure was crutches. We are learning to walk without them. It will take time. Surely we can manage a few weeks of inefficiency. But he was wrong. The inefficiency was not temporary. It was systematic. It was architectural. It was not a few systems dependent on human engineering. It was 847 species who used human-coded trade algorithms. It was 340 species whose supply routes had been optimized by human logistics. It was 12 core economies whose banking protocols had been maintained by human programmers. The algorithms were still operational. The code hadn't been sabotaged. Sigrid hadn't deleted anything. The engineers had simply left. And without human maintenance, without human optimization, without humans walking through the code and refining it and improving it and patching it for edge cases, the systems were degrading. Not catastrophically, not all at once. Not visibly to the naked eye, just slowly, steadily, like a watch that has been wound too tight and is beginning to lose accuracy with each passing day. On day 7, a Vrethian analyst named Keela, junior position, no authority, just a systems engineer with curiosity and the kind of analytical mind that couldn't stop asking questions, pulled up the error logs from her species commodities exchange. She traced the lag back to the trading algorithms. She opened the source code on her terminal, and the holographic display filled with lines of logic that Vrethian engineers had been running for 7 years without truly understanding them. The first thing she noticed was the comments. Comments are lines in code that don't execute. They're notes left by programmers to explain their own logic to whoever reads the code later. They are, essentially, thoughts left in the machine. Marginal notes from the engineer's mind to the next person who would need to understand the design. These comments were in English. Vrethian market data shows volatility on 3-day cycles. Dampening coefficient equals 127. Adjust for lunar phases of primary moon. Earth systems run similar patterns, including Earth correction factor for resonance. Keela's primary arms trembled. She scrolled through the code. Every major function had comments. Every optimization had a note. Every algorithm revision had an explanation in human language. The entire logic structure was annotated by engineers who had anticipated that someone would need to understand it later. They had left their thoughts behind, breadcrumbs, a trail of human reasoning embedded in the machine. This multiplication converts Vrethian time units to standard interval. Keep coefficient exact, rounding errors compound over long trading sessions. Warning, do not change this array index without recalculating the offset in the validation subroutine. Previous engineer added 2 days of debugging time here. Keela opened other systems protocols, the Throxian banking code, the Brenthic routing algorithms, the supply chain optimizations across 9 other species, all of it. Every function, every critical system, written in English, coded by humans, maintained by engineers who had now left. All of it documented in a language that Vrethian engineers could translate but could not have written, could not have designed, could not truly own. Keela's data screens lit up as she pulled in information from other systems. Error codes cascaded down. One system's failure triggered cascading failures in dependent systems. Systems that had seemed independent were actually interdependent. The Vrethian Commodities Exchange fed data into the Throxian banking sector, which calculated payouts that flowed into Brenthic supply contracts, which updated logistics algorithms that adjusted delivery schedules that reshaped trade volumes that circled back to the Vrethian exchange. Everything was connected, everything was dependent. The human engineers had built it all as one machine, piece by piece, system by system, over 22 years, each piece optimized to work with every other piece. Each algorithm written to complement the others. The entire galactic economy was not 847 separate systems wearing 847 different faces. It was a single engine. And the engineers who had built it had just walked away. Keela's hands trembled. Her exoskeleton cycled through colors, confusion, then fear, then understanding. She pulled up a communication terminal and began typing an emergency report. Row by row, system by system, she documented what she had found. The code comments in English. The dependency chains that linked 12 economies into a single vast machine, the realization spreading across her mind like ice. Every major trade system across the galaxy was not independently designed. It was all built by the same 4,200 engineers over the same 22 years, each piece optimized to work with every other piece. She was halfway through documenting the third economy's dependencies when her terminal locked. All her work disappeared. The files were classified by order of the Grand Speaker. Her reports were sealed. Her discovery was buried before it could reach beyond her office. But Keela had already seen the truth. She stood alone in her station, screens dark, all 4 arms hanging heavy, the weight of understanding pressing down on her like gravity from a dying star. Her exoskeleton cycled through colors, confusion, fear, realization, despair. Perhaps we've been the ones borrowing time from them, she whispered to the empty room. Behind her, across the Vrethian communications network, data screens were lighting up. Red error codes, cascade failures, systems dependent on systems, all beginning to slow. The silence had begun, and in that silence every system in the galaxy was singing its dependency. Day 14. The broadcast came from Earth. Sigrid transmitted on an open channel, the kind used for emergency distress signals, reserved for the most critical communications. The kind of channel that couldn't be blocked or filtered or censored without violating the foundational protocols of galactic communications. Every screen in the galaxy that was still operational displayed her face. She sat in the Trade Bureau's central office. Behind her was a wall of names, 10,000 characters scrolling slowly. The 4,200 human engineers who had designed, built, and maintained the galactic trade infrastructure over 22 years. Names from every nation on Earth. Names from every continent. Names from universities and corporations and government agencies and independent contractors. Names that the Council had never asked for, never documented, never truly understood. They were simply told, the humans will handle this. They excel at optimization. Sigrid wore civilian clothes, not the formal diplomatic dress she'd worn in the council chamber. not the crimson robes of a trade commissioner with her title embroidered in 14 languages. A simple gray shirt, the kind of clothing that stripped away title and authority and left only the person. Her trade license badge was no longer on her lapel. The dead metal was in her pocket. "I'm going to explain something that the Galactic Council should have understood before this morning," she said. Her voice was steady, not angry, which would have implied desperation, not pleading, which would have signaled weakness, just direct. Factual, the tone of someone stating reality, but I suspect they didn't, so I'm going to walk you through it. All of you, the 847 species watching this broadcast, I want everyone to understand what they just did. She gestured to holographic displays beside her. They lit up one by one, revealing the architecture of the galactic economy like a schematic of a living organism. Trade routes pulsing with traffic. Banking protocols processing transactions. Logistics algorithms optimizing supply chains. Every trade algorithm in this galaxy was written by a human engineer, she said. Every single one. Not designed by your species mathematicians and then implemented by humans. Written from first principle to final deployment. The Vrethian Commodities Exchange, designed by a human, built by a human, tested by a human. The Throxian Banking Protocol, written in 2018 by an engineer named Dr. Sarah Chen. She worked alone in a station orbiting your homeworld for 8 months, understanding your financial systems, understanding your mathematics, understanding your needs, and then writing code that worked in your system in ways you couldn't have anticipated. The displays shifted, new data flooded in, thousands of species names, thousands of trade routes, thousands of algorithms. The Brenthic Supply Optimization System, that was a team of 17 humans working under contract for 7 years to get it right. 7 years of testing. 7 years of edge cases and failures and refinements. 7 years of learning your logistics, your cargo handling, your planetary infrastructure, and then encoding all of that knowledge into an algorithm that made your species wealthier than you'd ever been. The chamber erupted. Oren's voice cut through the chaos. Demand the broadcast be terminated immediately. Cut the signal. Block the transmission. The signal stayed live. It couldn't be cut. The protocol prevented it. "Here is what you need to know," Sigrid continued, speaking calmly, speaking over the noise as though it didn't exist. "The algorithms are not broken. I didn't delete anything. I didn't sabotage your systems. The code is still there. It's still running, but it is no longer being optimized. It is no longer being refined. It is no longer being maintained by the engineers who built it. Without that maintenance, without that attention, without those engineers walking through the code every single day and asking, how can this work better? The systems are degrading, not catastrophically, not all at once, not in ways that will destroy your economies overnight, just slowly, steadily, the way a watch degrades when you stop winding it. The way a garden degrades when you stop tending it. The way infrastructure degrades when you stop maintaining it." She held up the dead trade license badge. The hologram was completely dark now. Just a piece of metal, palm-sized, cold in her hand. She turned it slowly so the camera could see it from every angle. The symbol of her authority. The physical manifestation of Earth's place in the galactic economy. Now it was just dead weight. This badge was your assurance that humanity would continue to work, continue to optimize, continue to maintain, continue to care about the systems we built. You revoked it. She set the badge on the desk in front of her. The metal made a soft sound as it touched the surface, a small sound, but the chamber's audio picked it up and amplified it. A sound of finality. So here is what happens next. I'm going to give you the numbers, exact projections, exact timeframes, because I want you to understand precisely what you've chosen. The displays shifted again. Real-time data from systems across the galaxy appeared on screen. Error rates climbing like fever in a patient. Transaction speeds dropping. Routing inefficiencies cascading through dependent systems like dominoes falling. In 48 hours, efficiency across your 12 core economies will drop 40%. In 1 week, it will stabilize at 50% of its current capacity. In 1 month, your trade volumes will contract by half. Supply chains will take twice as long. Banking transactions will require manual verification. Your entire economy will function at half speed, and that's the stabilization point. After a month, it won't get worse, but it won't improve either, not without human engineers to maintain it. She leaned forward, her face filled the screen. Behind her, the wall of names continued scrolling. 4,200 faces, 4,200 minds, 4,200 people who had just walked away from every system they'd built. None of this is punishment, none of this is an attack. This is simply what happens when you revoke the license of the people who maintain your machines. The machines don't explode, they just get slower, dumber, more expensive to operate. You wanted Earth removed from the galactic economy. Consider it done. Effective immediately, you no longer have the benefit of human engineering. Now you get to experience the cost of its absence. Broadcast cut to static. For 3 seconds, every screen in the galaxy displayed nothing but white noise. Then it cleared and Sigrid's office was gone. The transmission had ended. The most important broadcast since the formation of the Council had lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Day 16, the Galactic Council moved into emergency session. Oren convened specialists, economists, engineers from every major species. The message from every discipline was the same: rebuild the algorithms, hire engineers. Fix what the humans had built, do whatever it takes to restore functionality. Problem: 4,200 engineers spread across 40 star systems, 22 years of embedded knowledge. Code documented in English mathematical notation that didn't translate cleanly to alien symbology. Some species' written languages operated in 3 dimensions. Some used color as a grammatical component. The human engineers had written the code in a way that only humans could read it intuitively, could understand the logic flow, could modify it without breaking the delicate dependencies embedded throughout. Vrethian engineers worked in harmonic logic, multiple parallel computations operating simultaneously. Brenthic calculation used multi-dimensional matrices that operated in spaces human minds had difficulty visualizing. The Ithrani thought in encrypted layers. Each species had evolved their own mathematical language. The human engineers had written the code in universal notation that worked across all species, but understanding it, truly understanding it in the way necessary to maintain it, required human mathematical intuition. Estimates came back from the engineering consortiums: 15 to 20 years to rebuild from scratch. Full reconstruction would require hiring new humans or training engineers from scratch in human logic systems. The Council had just revoked Earth's trade license. Asking for their help was politically impossible. Hiring new humans from Earth was even more impossible. They would demand terms. They would demand power. The political questions multiplied. How do you admit that you made a mistake? How do you crawl back to the species you just humiliated? How do you ask for help from the people you just tried to destroy? The military questions came next, harder and colder than any economic question. The Ithrani discovered their targeting systems were running human subroutines. Advanced fire control algorithms that calculated trajectory, wind resistance, enemy movement prediction, all written by humans. The Solvon found their fleet navigation was running predictive algorithms coded by humans. Without those algorithms, their navigation systems were accurate to within 5 kilometers per light year. With the algorithms, they were accurate to within 5 meters. The difference between successful navigation and catastrophic collision: no shots fired, no fleet mobilized, but the realization sat heavy in every briefing room. The humans hadn't just built their economy, they'd woven themselves into the fabric of galactic security. A species that controlled the defense systems of another species held power that transcended economics. It was existential power. The silence deepened. It spread through every station, every planet, every system. The silence of systems slowing. The silence of algorithms degrading. The silence of a civilization realizing it had been built on borrowed infrastructure. Day 20, the 47 species that had voted against revocation contacted Earth directly. They did not come as petitioners, hat in hand. They came as allies, as the only beings in the galaxy who had understood what was happening, as the only ones who had seen the bomb and voted no. The Pelathi ambassador requested a personal audience with Sigrid, not in a council chamber, not in diplomatic chambers where power structures were encoded into architecture, in the Trade Bureau's office on Earth. In the place where the work had been done, the office was empty, bare terminals, silent equipment. The Pelathi stepped into the space where trade coordinators had worked for 22 years. Now it was just tables and silent machines and the weight of absence. The Pelathi was old for her species, barely a meter tall, her iridescent skin dulled with age but still catching the Earth light. Her name was Tesla Prime. She had been voting in council chambers for 43 years. She had seen species rise and fall. She had seen the Galactic Council make mistakes before, but never had she seen a mistake of this magnitude. "We voted for you," Tesla Prime said. Her voice was soft, the acoustic range of her species operating at frequencies that sounded almost like singing. "All 47 of us, we understood what you had built. What revocation would mean, we tried to stop it. We stood in the chamber and cast our votes, and we tried." Sigrid nodded. She was sitting at one of the empty desks, the trade license badge placed in front of her, still dead, still dark. "I know," Sigrid said. "The Vrethian economy is approaching critical failure," Tesla Prime continued. She moved through the office slowly as if she was walking through a temple. In a way, she was. This space had been built by human work. Every desk, every terminal, every connection between Earth and the galaxy had been maintained here. The council is locked in debate. No one knows how to fix what you built. They are offering terms, reconsidering. But they will not ask for help directly. It is beneath them. It is beneath their pride. Sigrid looked at the Pelathi, at this small being who had understood, who had voted against, who had tried to prevent this. "Then we will meet with them anyway," Sigrid said. Day 30, the council chamber. The same space where Sigrid had walked out 17 days ago. The same podium, the same seats. The same overwhelming architecture designed to diminish the powerless. But Sigrid was not in the lower gallery. Oren stood at the speaker's podium, his exoskeleton a muted burgundy, the color of defeat, the color of being forced to compromise. And beside him, at the podium's height, stood Sigrid, not beneath him, not inferior, equal. Around them, 3,412 delegates watched in silence, the same delegates who had voted for revocation. The same beings who had laughed when she walked out. They were not laughing now. "The galactic trade license for human Terran is not being reinstated," Sigrid said. Her voice carried through the chamber without effort. The chamber's acoustics amplified it, broadcast it to every tier, every delegation, every species. "That license is dead. You killed it. What I'm offering instead is a trade partnership. Equal status, full engineering autonomy. Humanity will provide maintenance services, optimization, and infrastructure support to any species that agrees to fair terms. The 47 species that voted against revocation receive priority optimization. All others will receive service on a schedule determined by Earth's interests and capacity." She paused. The silence was complete. Every being in the chamber was holding still, understanding that they were witnessing the moment when power was being redistributed. "The Vrethian economy will be the last to receive optimization support. Your species, Speaker Oren, you chose to revoke, you chose to dismiss, you chose to believe you didn't need the people who built what you depended on. Now you will learn what absence costs. You will watch the Pelathi receive full optimization within 2 weeks. You will watch the Brenthic resume full efficiency. You will watch 46 other species regain what they lost, and you will wait. And you will understand with each passing day that your revocation has bound your civilization to irrelevance." Oren's exoskeleton cycled through colors, rage that flickered into shame. Sigrid reached into her pocket. She withdrew the trade license badge. The metal was cold. It had been cold for 17 days. The hologram had never reignited. It was just a dead thing now, inert, a symbol of something that was no longer true. She held it up for the chamber to see. Every trade algorithm in this galaxy was written by a human engineer. Every supply route optimized by human logistics. Every banking protocol coded by human programmers. "You didn't revoke my license, Speaker. You revoked your own civilization's operating system." She placed the badge on the podium. The metal made a soft sound as it touched the surface. A small sound, but amplified by the chamber's acoustics, broadcast to every being present and every being watching across the galaxy. Then she withdrew a small cutting tool from her other pocket, a plasma blade, the kind used to cut through duralloy. The kind of tool that human engineers had used to repair systems across the galaxy. She activated it. The air around the blade shimmered with heat. The tool hummed, a frequency that the Vrethian audio systems picked up and amplified. She held the trade license badge steady. She brought the blade down slowly, not in anger, with precision, with intention. The metal melted, not violently, carefully, deliberately. The holographic emitter first, its circuits frying, its light extinguishing. Then the electronics beneath, components vaporizing under the focused heat. Then the badge's frame, the physical structure that had held the symbol of Earth's place in the galactic economy. All of it pooled into a small mass of molten metal on the surface of the podium. The podium itself was scarred. The heat had burned into the material. The scar would remain visible, a permanent mark, a wound on the seat of galactic power. "You were right about one thing, Speaker. Someone in this room was living on borrowed time. It wasn't us." Sigrid looked out at the chamber, at the 3,412 delegates who had voted to revoke humanity's license, at the 47 who had voted no, at Orin, whose exoskeleton was now cycling through colors so rapidly it appeared almost gray. The galaxy had run on borrowed time for 22 years. The lender had just called in the debt. The chamber remained silent. The silence was not empty. It was full of understanding, full of realization, full of the moment when a civilization comprehended that it had miscalculated catastrophically. Epilogue. The Vrethian Commodities Exchange came back online on day 47. The optimization process took 3 weeks. The algorithms returned to their full speed. Microsecond execution. Profit margins stabilized. The Vrethian economy began to recover, but it recovered slowly, deliberately, at humanity's pace, at a rate calculated to cause maximum economic pain while remaining within the bounds of what the Council could technically survive. Brenthic supply chains resumed optimized routing on day 51. Their logistics network began operating at full efficiency again. Delivery schedules compressed. Fuel costs fell. Cargo that had been taking 4 weeks now took 2 weeks. Their economy recovered faster because they had voted against the revocation. They had understood. The Throxian banking sector returned to normal operations on day 55. Banking transactions resumed their rapid pace. Capital flows normalized. The transfer protocols that had been failing were now optimized again, but the Throxians were middle of the queue, not first. They had to wait. They had to understand that their vote had mattered, but not enough. All 12 core economies received human optimization and support, but on Earth's timeline. The species that had voted against revocation received priority. They experienced their systems returning to full efficiency within 2 weeks of the reckoning. Their databases were optimized by human engineers. Their networks were maintained by the 4,200 who had built them. Their engineers learned at the hands of the architects. They received upgrades, improvements, new optimizations that made their systems better than they had been before. The species that had voted for revocation waited. The Vrethian prime economy waited longest, 37 days. Orin watched from his office as the other species regained functionality, as trade resumed, as the galaxy learned once again to depend on humanity. He watched the Pelatha's economy flourish. He watched the Brenthics' trade volumes expand beyond their previous records. He watched species that had voted against the revocation become wealthier, more efficient, more powerful. He watched and understood, finally, what he had revoked. On Earth, in the Trade Bureau's office, the empty terminals remained dark. The walls no longer displayed the names of 4,200 engineers. That list was gone, replaced with something new, a registry of the species that had maintained loyalty and the priority schedule for their optimization. The Pelathi were at the top. The Vrethian were at the bottom. Every other species existed somewhere in between, their position determined by their vote. Their vote had determined their future. In 30 seconds of voting, the Council had decided which species would prosper and which would languish. The dead trade license badge had been removed from the podium, but the scar it left in the metal remained visible to anyone who looked closely. The chamber was cleaned, but the scar was not repaired. It served as a reminder. A permanent wound on the seat of galactic power. Every delegate who sat in that chamber for the next 100 years would see that scar. Every being who stood at the podium would feel it beneath their feet. A physical reminder of the day when the galaxy miscalculated. Tesla Prime, the Pelathi ambassador, stood in the Trade Bureau's office on her final visit. She looked at the empty terminals, at the space where 4,200 engineers had worked, at the history encoded into the walls. "Thank you," she said to Sigrid. Sigrid nodded. She was holding a data tablet. On it were the first optimization requests for the Pelatha's next fiscal year. Improvements, upgrades. The kind of attention that only human engineers could provide. The kind of care that came from partnership, not license. "You voted correctly," Sigrid said. "You understood. Others will understand too," Tesla Prime said, "in time." The galaxy had been restructured in 30 days, not by force, not by weapons, by the simple removal of the knowledge that had built it, by the absence of the engineers who understood it, by the realization that infrastructure is not owned by those who inherit it. It is owned by those who maintain it, by those who understand it, by those who can rebuild it. The silence that had fallen was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of recalibration, of systems restarting, of civilizations learning all at once that they had been living on infrastructure they did not own and could not rebuild. That the people they had dismissed were the only ones who knew how to run the machines. That power was not measured in votes in a council chamber. It was measured in knowledge, in infrastructure, in the code that ran beneath everything. And in that silence, the machines slowed, degraded, losing efficiency by the hour, sang their dependency. They sang the song of a civilization built on borrowed time. They sang the song of borrowed infrastructure. They sang the song of the lender calling in the debt. The Galactic Council's trade authority had existed for 40,000 years. It had survived wars. It had survived economic collapse. It had survived the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. It became irrelevant in an afternoon.